So, what is happening with Mr. Robertson today? The 6 p.m. is a really critical time. Basically, it's when the execution is scheduled. Am I correct?
Yes, his execution is scheduled for 6 p.m. this evening, and that time is quickly approaching. It's quite unbelievable that we find ourselves in this position, given especially the extraordinary hearings that took place yesterday before the Texas legislature, really showing the evidence of Robert's innocence and the fact that his conviction rests on medical and scientific evidence that we know is no longer valid.
Can you explain how and why it's no longer valid and what current medical science says?
At the time that Robert's daughter fell ill and ultimately died, it was presumed that if there were certain conditions observed in a young child, which involved bleeding in the eyes, bleeding in the brain, brain swelling, that those three conditions referred to as the triad were presumptive of abuse. And that if you saw those conditions, you didn't need to look further. A diagnosis of abuse was justified. Well, that has changed. And the Court of Criminal Appeals recently issued a decision in another case that rested upon the shaken baby syndrome hypothesis, because those tenets of that theory are known to no longer be indicative of abuse. So if you see those conditions, you can't stop. You have to look further and say what was going on with this child. You have to look at their medical history because we now know that accidents and illness can cause those same conditions that once were believed to be abuse. And what came out of yesterday's hearing was just so remarkable was that there's a lot of misinformation that has come about in this case. And when you look at what really happened, and over the years, the medical evidence more and more became available and showed what actually happened. In this case, it's unusual for us at the Innocence Project. Sometimes we know that the medical or scientific evidence used to obtain a criminal conviction is no longer valid. Well, we have that here, but we also know why Robert's daughter died. She was very ill in the days and weeks leading up to her death, and unknown at the time, but known now, she was dealing with two different types of pneumonia, both viral, and then it turned into bacterial, and it was fatal. It turned into sepsis and caused injuries that were mistaken and misconstrued for abuse.
So, this afternoon, this evening, what happens? You've got there's the legislature, which is asking for him to appear. I think on is it Monday, which would indicate that they're trying to get the execution stayed or delayed. And then you're hoping on a court decision this evening, right?
So we have a motion pending in the Court of Criminal Appeals. So Texas's highest court could step in and stop the execution. We also have a petition pending before the United States Supreme Court, who could also issue a stay and stop the execution. And of course, Governor Abbott has the power to issue a 30-day reprieve, so that the evidence of Robert's innocence can be more thoroughly examined. What's so unusual in this case is that the lawmakers have come forward and said, we passed a statute referred to as Texas's junk science writ. And Texas was a leader in the country, the first to pass this type of statute that said, if there is evidence that was used at a criminal trial to obtain a conviction that later it turns out is no longer valid, it has become discredited, then the person is entitled, has an avenue to get back into court. And those doors have been shut for Robert. The legislature said this law is not being used as it was intended to be. It's not being applied in situations like Robert. And we need to study the law, which they started yesterday, and we want to continue. And if we need to make amendments or we need to pass new legislation to make sure that people whose conviction rests on discredited science are able to get back into court like we thought was happening with 11073, then we need to do it. And so these changes may happen, and we don't want them to come too late after Robert is executed.
How is he? For those who are in contact with him, how is his state of mind right now?
Robert is a man of faith. His faith has helped him endure being first and foremost losing his daughter and then being sentenced to death and spending so much time on death row and the uncertainty of not knowing whether he'll be executed. He is humbled and feels so supportive and is so appreciative of the outpouring of support. You had Texas lawmakers, Republicans and Democrats, go visit with him on death row and pray with him. Just to know that 86 Texas House representatives, including 30 Republicans, signed a letter asking for his execution to be stopped, that you have doctors, scientists, autism activists, parental rights activists, and Brian Wharton, the former lead detective in his case, who arrested Robert and played a big role in his conviction, saying, I helped send an innocent man to prison. You have all these people coming forward to support Robert, to say, this man shouldn't die. He's in prison for a crime that never occurred. So that support is sustaining him in these uncertain times.
Is there anything that should be mentioned in all of this on this particular day? Am I missing anything?
Well, I think that Texas has been such a leader. At the Innocence Project, we've looked to Texas as a leader in the nation in terms of providing reforms, especially in cases like Robert, where this science and medical understanding has evolved. And this case is just out of step right now with what we've come to expect from Texas in terms of providing real, meaningful pathways and taking leadership when it comes to correcting miscarriages of justice involving wrongful conviction.
All right, very good. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. Please hit the subscribe button and get the latest news by downloading the CBS Austin News app.